Welcome to Impact Farming, where we introduce you to the people and ideas that will have a massive impact on your farming operation. Brought to you by Farm Marketer. Sit down, start the engine, and let's roll with today's show.
We're going to transition into the last, what I'll call formal part of the conference. Of course, we're going to host dinner and stuff afterwards that we hope to see everybody at. Next up is something that we're really, really excited about. It was part of an idea whenever we were, spitballing ideas as to what we're going to do with this conference. We always circle back to how can we end this thing off with a bang. And we are lucky enough to have with us the host of the Impact Farming Show, with us, Tracy Brunette. We are going to host a podcast right here in this room that will be released at a later date. With Tracy will be Minister Bloyce Thompson, not in his role as minister, but more in his role as a dairy farmer on Prince Edward Island. And we've been lucky enough to have Lauchie and Jolene MacEachern come over from Nova Scotia as well. So if you'll please give them all a big round of applause as they come up.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Good. Hi, I'm Tracy from Farm Marketer and host of the Impact Farming Show. We are a video and podcast show that is released weekly, and we tackle the subjects of farm business management, mental health, and transition planning. So as Kip mentioned, we're going to do a live recording. So I just want to set the scenario, set the stage here, and then I'm going to pretend like I'm in my little room in my office with no people here recording. And then we're going to have a fantastic conversation about transition planning. When we talk about the future of farming, I don't think there's a better subject than transition planning. And it's exciting. So 2 great farm family stories here. So let's roll. Okay, we're going to start in for the benefit of everybody in the audience. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Impact Farming Show. Today, we have a very special episode. I am live on location in Prince Edward Island at the Future of Farming Conference. And today, I have a panel that I'm going to be hosting, moderating with 2 farm families, and they're going to share their transition planning story. And as you guys know, the subject of the conference is the future of farming, and what better way to talk about it than transition planning. So why don't we start off and get you guys to share your story. We have a traditional succession planning, transition planning, and then we have non-traditional, what people refer to as a third-party transition planning. Bloyce, would you like to start?
Sure. Thanks, Tracy. I guess my story is when I graduated from NSAC, which is now Dal Ag, I came home and farmed with my father till 2000, and in 2004 I took over the farm and full-time, and my father still farmed with me part-time and until 2010, and then he fully retired. But that's currently now I'm still farming with my wife Terry and our 3 children, and we're dairy farming, and I'm also the Minister of Agriculture for this island now, so I have a couple different jobs.
Excellent. Would you guys like to share your story?
Yeah, sure. I feel like if this room was a little older, they probably would have heard our story already. We've been in a few publications just because our story is a bit different. Similar story to Bloyce, except I didn't grow up on a farm. My parents owned a gas station, and my father was an electrician. But I had a friend growing up who lived on a farm, and I spent a lot of time there. And that brought me to the agricultural college. And upon graduation, I needed a place to work close to the college because there was a young lady that I was a little bit fond of that was still going there. So
That's me.
so I found a job on a local dairy farm. I worked for Henry and Janet Isis starting in 2001, and worked there for 2.5 years. Jolene and I were married while we worked for Henry, and after 2.5 years, we decided we wanted to try some different things, get some more experience in other areas, so we left. And so that was, 2003, I guess, we left. In the spring of 2006, Henry approached us and asked if we wanted to work out a succession plan with him to buy his farm. So that's something that Henry and I had discussed over the years about me wanting to farm, and me explaining to him I didn't think I could afford to get into farming just at that time, and he approached us. So in January 1st, 2013, we purchased the farm from Henry and Janet Isis, and we currently farm with our three children. And Jolene works for Dalhousie University, the Ag College. So.
Excellent, thank you. For the people in my audience, they know my story, but I want to share a little bit here about my story and why I started the Impact Farming Show. So I farm with my husband. We have beef and forage in Manitoba, and 17 years ago, I started the media company farmmarketer.com, news, weather, commodities, largest farm real estate website. And then 7 years ago, we were redoing our website, and I said, what more can we add to our website to serve our audience of farmers? I said, well, a podcast. Farmers are on the go. Podcast video show. Okay, good. What can we cover? Business. Excellent. So many of the publications out there I find do a fantastic job of covering production agriculture, the crops, the animals. So I said, let's do business. So I started the Impact Farming Show, weekly video and podcast show. And if somebody asked me why I started it, I would give the answer I just gave you guys. And then if we dug a little deeper, I'd go, okay, well, it's good content. I'm a media company. That's why I'm doing it. If you asked me to go a little bit deeper, I'd say, well, transition planning is super important. And you know what? There's a lot of people that'll dabble in it and say, you need a transition plan. And I think farmers are tired of hearing that. So I said, I can do better. But if you really ask me my why behind why I started it, we all know, I'm sure we have neighbors, people in our province, farmers we hear about that don't plan, and then we have those not so fun family fights, right? I see a few heads in the audience. Glad I'm not the only one. So that being said, when I sat there and looked at what I can do in the show, I said, you know what? This is important. We need a plan. I'm going to tackle it because previous generations maybe didn't have the information. Like you said, Bloyce, 15 years ago, we wouldn't be having these conferences, not very much talk about it. Same with my grandparents, right? But I said, our generation, right here, I see the future of agriculture. And I even seen a little second generation coming up, hopefully, a little farmer, what a cutie. But here's the thing, there's so much information out here, there's so much opportunity coming up with transition planning. Baby boomers are retiring, right? It's scary, there's concerns, but there's so much opportunity. So I really wanted to touch on that because I think that is the theme, the excitement, the concerns that a lot of people share when it comes to transition planning. So that's my story, why I'm passionate, why I'm so very thankful to be here. So why don't we continue on? Communication. If you ask a lot of people, they think transition planning's a tax plan, banking, but I think truly at the heart of it, there's a can of worms that need to be opened around communication with farm family. It's not easy working with family. So I am opening that can of worms on the show and talking about some of those hard subjects so that we can get these transition planning conversations going. So Bloyce, getting personal here, when you were looking at taking over the farm, what was that dynamic with your dad? Was he the one, sorry, I'm digging a little personal here. Was he the one to offer up? What was the scenario there?
No, thanks for asking. No, my father never talked about it. It was my mother that drove the transition plan. She had plans. She saw what she wanted in retirement for them, and she knew that she would have to steer the conversation, and that's how we started. And meeting with our accountants, and no, my father would have worked right up to the end if he could have, but he did enjoy retirement after he was actually into it. So, but no, definitely my mother drove that conversation, and that's how it all started.
Excellent, thank you. You guys want to talk about communication? Your scenario is a little bit different. The farm founder, he approached you guys. Do you want to talk about the importance of communication? Sometimes working with family can be challenging, right? And communication becomes an issue. Do you think it was easier being non-family transition?
Absolutely, it was easier being non-family, I think. We didn't have to sit across from the dinner table from each other every night, and we both went home and complained about each other probably, so we got it off our chest that way. But from day one, Henry and I spoke the same language, so our communication was very good. We both knew what, if one of us said something, we knew what the other person was, we understood what the other person was saying. So, and I realize that now after Henry's not there and I have new employees and I talk and they seem to have no idea what I'm saying, but no, communicate. We were very open as well about expectations and what both of us needed and wanted out of this succession deal. So,
can I add to that? So I'm going to add what I'm going to call the partner problem. And I think that, Henry and Lauchie would work all day on the farm together and they'd be working on something and they would talk about something a little contentious and they just kept working and it was fine. And then he would come home and tell me, and I might not agree with what they had discussed during the day. And the same would happen with Henry when he would go home to talk to Janet. So it became apparent quite early in the process that we all needed to sit around the table together. And I want to stress the importance of that because the decisions that are made affect the entire family. And just to give a little clarity, I don't think we mentioned, we worked with Henry for 6.5 years before we bought the farm. So he gave the call in 2006 and said, would you guys like to work with me? He gave us a date of 2013. So we moved immediately to the farm and worked alongside with him for those 6.5 years. So we had that time to work out all of the kinks, I would say, but I don't remember how we established this, but I remember starting to have kitchen meetings. Super awkward, right? Like, we're going to have a meeting about farm succession, and we really did. Like, we sat around the table, and we'd had a cup of coffee, and it was super awkward, but we just kept it really professional and took the checklist with us, and so it guided the conversation, and it just took the emotion out of it. Right? Because there's so much emotion. So even though we weren't family, this was still their home and their business and they had their family to think about. And we were also, sitting on the other side of the farm thinking about our future and what if this doesn't work and what about our family? So, there's always the family dynamic included in that. And we talked to a lot of people about this topic and I've always urged them to do that family meeting, to sit around the table and make a point of doing it at a regular basis so everybody expects that this is going to happen. And I think that made it easier.
Nice, thank you for sharing that. A lot of the farm advisors that I interview, they are big on starting family meetings when you're young so that it's not quite awkward when all of a sudden you need to start talking about transition planning. One of the things I quickly want to mention, I call myself an in-betweener on age because I'm not as young as I used to be. And I'm not that kid that was looking to take over the farm anymore. And I'm not the older generation. I like to say I have a leg on each side of the fence, and I understand the concerns and fears and desires of each generation, and maybe touching on that a little bit too. And we look at the dynamics, and I've looked at a lot of stereotypical, the farm founder, let's say the male, and then the mom. A lot of the farm founders don't necessarily want to have that conversation. It's not personal. They want the farm to continue on. They want their kids to farm, but it might not be in their wheelhouse. They want to farm. And what I have learned often, me being the female will open the can of worms here, often it is mom, like you said, Bloyce, that starts the conversation. Dad just wants to go and farm. Leave him alone. Let him do what he wants to do. And this is stereotypical, not everybody, right? But it is one thing that my clients, the guests that I interview, they say often mom is the one that has to start the conversation. One, she wants to retire, do her thing, do something other than farming. But also, mom is the one that takes care of the relationships in the family, right? Mom is the one that wants harmony. And if we're not dealing with the transition, there's just that undercurrent in a farm family, right? Nobody knows what's going on. So I've heard that, and I think it's important, slightly uncomfortable to address these things, and it's stereotypical, not every farm, so if it doesn't apply, don't take it. But I think it's important that we talk about that, because if we're waiting on individuals to plan, and we might wait a long time, right, Bloyce?
Yeah, that's right. And I'll just add to that, Tracy, is my father and I work side by side every day. And until he retired, and rest his soul, he's passed away now, but we didn't talk about transition, even though we were together every day. And when my mother started that conversation, he was standoffish, of course, and when it finally went through, and I was part owner, he came to me, and his way of, well, you want to farm? He said, I'm done milking. So you want it to farm? You're milking the cows now. And he held to that, but that was his way of with dealing with the situation at the time. And when he did retire, we were probably closer when he did retire. We were probably best friends then. We probably argued like a father and son do. We probably didn't get along as well when we were farming together as we did after he retired. So success to my mother for getting the job done, but you're right, she was the harmony keeper.
And that's kind of why I want to start having these uncomfortable conversations, because not necessarily do the bankers, the lawyers, the accountants want to have these conversations. I've been sitting back and watching the industry, being part of it, and realizing that there's a lot more involved in transition planning than the tax plan, than the accounting plan. And, well, heck, I'll just have these conversations, and they'll be uncomfortable, but I'm doing it for everybody. So we'll move on to preparation. So let's talk about preparing. Our first stage, between the farm founders, there needs to be some communication and a desire for the farm to transition. Mom needs to say to farm founder, Dad, okay, let's do this. Any way it gets started, that's great. So communication needs to start, ball needs to get rolling. Second stage is preparing. This is your guys' future. Books, all kinds of great information, conferences like this, we need to prepare. So I want to ask you guys a little bit, what was that stage? How did that come about? Who did you talk to start preparing, learning, getting the ball rolling? Bloyce, do you want to go?
Yeah, well, like I said earlier, our accountant at the time, I think Patrick Traynor was just a young pup when my parents were with that firm and with Gerard Fitzpatrick at first, and then Patrick became our accountant later on. But I'm like you, Tracy. I'm 1 foot in, 1 foot out. I'm starting to think of planning for a succession now. That's the stage of life I'm in. I probably forget more about what I did when taking over than what I'm thinking of doing now. And this is where I'm probably taking more notes here today, listening to you and Lauchie and Jolene, of course, with how to go about my next steps. You know, my neighbor, who's only a couple of years older than I am, just sold their farm. My neighbor down the road, who's only a few more years older than that, just sold their farm. So, yeah, I'm thinking about it. And so what we start planning is definitely start, I really feel I have to make it feasible as attractive for my children. That's where I'm at right now. Where do I spend the money so that they are attracted to, they see a future in farming. And so I have to spend money right now to make that attractive. And they're at that age, they're not quite sure if they're going to farm or not. And and I don't want to put too much pressure on them, but I do want a farm to be sustainable when they do get it. So I have a lot going through my mind right now on what that looks like.
Thank you. Do you guys want to comment?
I'm just going to let Jolene deal with this topic. She's the list maker. She loves lists, so this was her. She was happy in this place, I guess.
Yeah, this is my happy place. Once I got over the fact that you wanted to buy a dairy farm, I was like, okay, here we go. So full disclosure, I grew up on a dairy farm, even though Lauchie didn't, so I knew a little bit about what we were getting into. And so preparation is interesting, actually, because you've hit a nail there, Bloyce. So there's preparing for the transition plan, and there's preparing for the transition, right? And so because we didn't really have any ownership stake in the business and we weren't part of the family, we didn't really have a lot of say in how to prepare this business for transition. Henry called all the shots of this deal. And we took those shots because we were just very grateful that we were given this opportunity. So you're thinking now about the investments you have to make, like that's really important because we could only do that from our perspective and say we knew what investments had to happen, but it was after the transition, right? So we were making lists, walking through the farm and going, we know this is getting old, we know this is gonna have to be replaced in 5 years, this is gonna have to be rebuilt, but we couldn't do anything about that because we didn't have any ownership stake. So all we really prepared for essentially was the transition plan itself. And so I was fortunate enough that I worked for the Department of Agriculture in Nova Scotia at the time, or right previous to. And so at that time, transition was starting to become a huge topic. And so I knew where to get the resources to do some of this. So I did a lot of research in this space and ended up finding at that time, we're talking almost 20 years ago, the BC government had a lot of really good resources on farm succession. And so I poured through those documents and I made a checklist for us. And that became like the Bible when we sat down at the kitchen table. And these are things that, I have so many things to say, so cut me off if I have to. But the problem is you'll try to hire an expert who has their own lens on it, right? And you will pay those people lots of money to sit down and work through things that you could work out yourself before you start hiring them. So I really, as painful and as awkward as it is, I really encourage you to do some of that homework before you call the experts, because lawyers will love to sit there and listen to all your family problems while they're charging you, no offense to any lawyers in the room, while they're charging you hundreds of dollars an hour, right? And so these lists include things like, okay, what happens in the transition period if somebody gets divorced? Like that really would have thrown a wrench into our situation, right? Or if somebody dies, what happens then? Like they talk about the 4Ds, death, divorce, dismemberment, disability. Like somebody gets really hurt and can't, like if Lauchie got really hurt and couldn't work anymore, or Henry did, like, because the money is so tight in some of these transition periods that, you know, you have to plan for having to hire someone else if somebody got really hurt, or, you know, wild things you don't want to think about, but these are the things you have to think about. And so we made those lists and we brought those to those kitchen tables and we worked through all of those scenarios before we went to the lawyer and asked to draw up a plan.
Excellent. That's what I love to hear. People taking control of their future. And I think sometimes with transition planning, it's the family farm. We're so invested. It's so emotional. We sometimes just say, okay, whatever, let's make it happen. And you know, throw that common sense to the wind. And that's what's neat about your story. It was farming and it was personal, but you were essentially buying a business. So it was, you removed the emotion from it, right? Where in a typical transition planning situation, we don't always think of those things. So that's incredibly important. Well done, well done.
I'll just jump back in here and say that, yeah, we were privileged to be in that position, but for some reason, a farmer's still a farmer and it's always emotional. So, you know, you're never able to completely, you know, those last 4 months before we signed the deal, oh my God, like I don't know how we're still married, but it was just so stressful because there always is emotion. And when you live with a family for 6.5 years and we've had our 3 children in that time on the farm, like they were like our children's grandparents. You know, they became like family. So I don't want to stand up here and say we were super black and white and it was easy not to get emotional, because it's always emotional. So the trick is learning how to manage those emotions and to just control the box that you're in so that the conversations are very structured and the checklists are there so that you're not, you know, everybody's pointing in the same direction, because it can go off the rails really fast.
Nice. I like that. And I really like how you mentioned the family meetings and being organized and having all the material and reviewing and thinking of those worst case scenarios, right? And in family transition, I'm thinking back to when we were looking to take over the family farm. You're young, you're eager, you want it to happen right away. And now I'm a little bit older and realize there's a time gap. It takes time because the farm founders also have their farming career, right? It's a tough balance because as in the farming operation, as young people, we're eager and we want to take ownership of the farm right away. And then there's so many competing priorities. And then the farm founder is living out his farming career on a farming operation that he's built and put in blood, sweat, and tears. We have farm mom. And then if we also look at it, we have daughter-in-law, son-in-law. So there's a lot of different concerns when it comes to planning. And I think one of the big things that our guests on our show like to communicate, and especially when we're talking to the next generation, is planning. Transition planning is a process, not an event. It's not, hey dad, hey mom, I want to buy the farm, and they're handing over the keys the next day. Usually doesn't work that way. It's probably good if it doesn't, because it takes time. So I want to quickly point out 2 things. You guys got a card on your clipboard, and I am huge on learning and reading and preparing for your future. The farm founders, they have their goals and concerns when it comes to transition planning, and they need to get ready and start the conversation. But as the next generation, you guys in the audience, if you want to be transitioning into the farm, it's important to get ready, to know what we're doing, to maybe have that information to start the conversation with your parents. So one of the things I did for you guys on our website, farmmarketer.com, if you go to Impact Farming Show, down the left-hand column, there is a tab called Free Resources, and I created an ebook for you guys because I'm so frustrated by this industry that says plan, 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 and the information's scattered everywhere. It's not pulled together, and we just give farmers little snippets. So I like to think, as a farmer and a media person, I have the best of both worlds, so I'm pulling it together for all of us. So this is a printed copy. If you guys want to go and download that, that's free of charge, and it has some amazing books that I've been learning about transition planning. So that's one of the important things I want to leave with a young audience is prepare and know what you're talking about, because farm founders might not have that knowledge and be uncomfortable to start that conversation. So prepare, prepare, prepare. Okay, so both of you guys, you've done your transition plan for yourself. You're into your farm. You guys are also thinking about the next generation, as you mentioned. What's on your mind? Are you planning already? Or are you putting it off? Putting it off? No, let's hope not.
No, I'm just getting going on it, and I really want to see what the next 5-10 years looks like, and I think we're going to have to start making those plans right now. What's different? My parents were terrified of debt. My parents started farming when interest rates were 18-20%. So my parents were terrified of debt. They still, they were believed in growing small, and we did take a very they were very successful in that measure. Not to knock that, but I'm not scared of debt, as my accountant who's sitting in the audience knows. But it's where I want my legacy to look like now. So I really, really am focused on the next 5 years, particularly, to see what I have to do to make that sustainable for my children. And no pressure, but I want no pressure on my children. If they don't want to farm, it's not for everybody. It's not an easy life. It's not an easy life. And I married a city girl, and she wonders why we do it some days, but she's very supportive of it, and she has grown to love the lifestyle as well, even though it's crazy sometimes because you are married to your farm as well. It's a big commitment. So the next 5 years will be key what that looks like, and that's where we're starting there right now.
Yeah, I guess we started the day we bought the farm. Not huge plans, but just forming a family trust was one of advice gave to us when we bought the farm by our accountants. Said form a family trust. It'll make the transfer to the next generation easier if you do it in the next 21 years, I guess, something like that. But as far as the next few years, yeah, we want to have a farm that's sustainable and successful for whoever takes it over. Maybe it's not one of our children, but somebody else wants to come in and work with us or buy it. Because we're in the same position as Bloyce. We're not forcing our children to take the farm over. We want them to do we want them to want it and not force them to do it. So, yeah. Anything else?
Perfect, thank you. I wanted to touch on the third-party succession planning. As I understand, there's a lot of farm kids in the audience, so that's the traditional transition planning. But there's also people in the audience that want to get into farming, or here's the thing. On farms where there are multiple children, the fair and equal become an issue, and often farms can't support several children. So we get in some of those, gosh, I just got to open the can of worms on everything hard today, okay? We get into those situations where there's several farm kids and they all want to farm, but the family farm only supports one income, one family. So the third party transition is becoming more and more common. Actually, lately I've been interviewing people about that. And for the reasons where other farm kids can branch off, if you look at the dynamics of farming and society, my grandparents, they had 12 children. The next generation probably had 3, 4. Now we're looking at some of the generations that don't have kids, or the kids don't want to farm. And you were mentioning a dairy farm lately. So third-party transition is becoming more and more common as the dynamics of society change. So yeah, that's a neat thing. It's a great opportunity. And if we look at people in the audience wanting to get in, what a great industry. We feed the world, right? It's never going to go out of style. So if you're in the audience, like I've been told that there are, third-party transition. Keep an eye out, talk to the bankers, the lawyers, farms in the neighborhood, work for farmers, keep your ear to the ground because there's a lot of opportunity. And it's very easy in agriculture with everything going on. We won't go into politics, but interest rates and everything that's going on, it's very easy to focus on the challenges. I mean, Mother Nature alone, right? But with that being said, we are going through what they call the great wealth transfer over the next 10 years. And there's huge opportunity for anybody that wants to farm. So I just wanted to add that because that's a new conversation that's coming to our industry, and I haven't heard a lot of people talking about it, and it's exciting for people. So one quick thing on transitioning roles, and then we'll go back here. One of the things that a lot of the advisors that I interview like to stress, like I said, is it takes time. Normally, you don't go from secretary to CEO in a company, and you don't go from getting out of university to getting the keys of the farm. We generally know it starts, you work on the farm, then you get some management decision, and then you end up taking ownership. So a lot of the advisors say patience and clear communication, right? So do you guys have any other comments on preparation, planning, do's, don'ts, words of wisdom, reflection?
I don't know if I have any words of wisdom or not, but I do feel that there's never a perfect time to do something, but there's never a bad time. And whether it's switching, building a robot barn, or doing buying a cow, or, you know, there's never a perfect time, or borrowing a lot of money to purchase land. My only regrets ever was I didn't buy that block of land when it was for sale, or I didn't do that expansion when I thought I should, or when the banker said, okay, it's, you know, when you get approvals, I suggest do it, because that's my only regrets on land I didn't buy, timely buildings, and then you get behind. It's never perfect. Don't get me like, I've never had a perfect opportunity where everything aligns up, but in agriculture, you got to do it, and you got to take a little bit of risk, and that's the only words of wisdom I got today.
I guess I'll touch on the patience topic that you mentioned. It takes a lot of patience to sit there for 6.5 years and watch something that's supposed to be yours at a certain date, and want to make lots of changes, and, you know, have the conversations with the owner, and he doesn't want to do it. You can't do it. You have to have a lot of respect for the person you're buying the farm from. They've spent their life building this business, and it has become their life. And you can't just walk in and take all that away from them. You have to let them, like we were lucky with Henry, because this was his plan. He had a date, he had what he wanted for the farm, and he stuck to it to the end. He could have probably got a lot more money for his farm if he had have pieced it out, but he wanted to see it keep going, and we were the beneficiaries of that. So I'm gonna stress the patience factor. There's a lot of people that go into farms and try to make changes and try to push the farmer out quick. I would have loved to have taken over in 2.5 years. You know, there was lots of things that I think we could have done then, kind of same as Bloyce, that we missed out on, buying quota or pieces of land, where the farm probably had the cash flow then, and then once we bought the farm, we didn't have the cash flow to do those things. We had to just kind of sit tight and grow at a slower pace. So patience is huge, and respect for the person who you're buying the farm from, whether it's your parents or somebody that is you're working with. It like I said, it's their life you're buying basically, and you have to kind of let them see it through to the end.
Even though that was a nice emotional end, I have to bring it back to something more structured. Because I don't know if we're going to talk about advisors or...
Go ahead.
Yeah? Do you want me to just jump into that? Yeah. Looking back, maybe we were difficult to get along with, and maybe that's why we struggled a bit trying to find good advisors. But it wasn't easy to find the right people to help us. And so I just wanted to talk about that as a major learning for us. We fired a couple because either they weren't responsive, or, you know, we had one professional group come and say they wanted to learn how to do farm succession with us. And we're like, heck no, you're not cutting your teeth on our situation. Like, this is already too complicated and stressful. So just stand up for yourself with advisors and trust your gut on that. But the thing I will say, that having people to be external voices in this discussion makes it so much easier. So the people that we did lean on that helped us so much was we had a third-party assessment of the farm. We hired somebody to do that, so that was somebody external to the situation who said, this is what the farm is worth. And then there was no negotiating about that, because that person was certified to make those assessments. We had a financial advisor do an assessment of the finances of the farm, because, you know, Henry was an eternal optimist, and he would say, oh, it'll be fine, that'll work out. And us on the other end going, you know, this is a lot of debt, and how is this gonna pan out? So we hired a financial analyst to look at the 5-year paperwork and projections, and it played in our favor because we used 6% interest, and we never ever paid anywhere near that, right? And so, but we were ready for 6% interest, like, you know, so making sure that you work with people who help you. You know, don't blue sky it too much. Try to be as real as possible, because, you know, 6% interest is now a thing again. And we probably never thought it would have been 5 years ago. The people that helped us the most were bankers and investment folks. And that was a bit of a surprise to us, I think. You know, we couldn't have done this deal without Farm Credit. Sorry, Derek, if he's still in the room. But they were just monumental in sitting down with us and having patience and answering all our questions and working through financial projections, and then giving us the transition loan. I'm not sure if that's still a thing, but where we were able to borrow money and over the 5-year period add pieces to that loan so that it was secured, and Henry didn't feel like he was, you know, there was a comment earlier about saying farmer holdback. Farmer holdback is a big thing to ask of a producer. You know, it's a lot of risk for them to say, okay, I'll loan you the money, because that's essentially what they're doing, is they're saying, I'll loan this $250,000 or $500,000 to you, with no guarantee if you run the farm into the ground. So Farm Credit had a program where they would take the risk, and we could still pay over time to Henry, and that was a big help to us at the time. But yeah, I just want to say that there's lots of people out there who want to sell you their services. So don't be afraid to ask questions about the cost. We did make a couple of huge mistakes in that space, going to lawyers and asking for a plan, and then, you know, being charged an exorbitant amount of money for a plan that didn't hold any water. So, you know, talk to us afterwards if you want about some of those specific experiences. But just trust your gut and do your homework, and don't be afraid to stand up for yourself.
Excellent. That is valuable advice. And you know what? Whether it's the farm founders or the second generation, finding those people can be really intimidating. And when we look at the team of advisors, You mentioned them. You want an accountant, a lawyer, your banker, investment individuals. And something that's really becoming a thing right now is farm transition coaches, and they act as a quarterback because all those individuals are very specialized knowledge. And if you go to one, you're going to get a tax plan, a legal plan, et cetera, et cetera. So what a lot of people are recommending nowadays is that third party can be called a coach or an advisor, and they really act as a quarterback for the transition plan. They know, I refer to them as the football coach. The football coach, he knows all the plays in the book, he knows the players, he knows where they should be, pulls them all together once he sits down, he or she, with the farm family to see what the needs are. So that's something that's becoming quite popular, and it takes a lot of the stress off farmers because, like you said, if you go to the wrong person, you might not get the right information, and you might go down this rabbit hole. And we also end up sometimes coming across people that don't know farm, and they'll easily take your business. So farm coach, there's an organization out there called CAFA, Canadian Association of Farm Advisors, and that is definitely worth a look. Those individuals, they're accredited and they have an overall picture on farm transition planning. So if you guys are in those stages, if you want to slip a card in front of mom and dad, find one of those individuals because they can be that quarterback and they just know everything that needs to happen and can make it happen easy. And again, easy is not necessarily quick, right? You get a plan, and in most families, you're years away from ownership actually being transitioned, but there's a plan in place and everybody's working towards it. Oh, good stuff. Wow, we covered a lot of ground. Do you guys, Bloyce, I want to ask you one more question about the process with your dad. When your mom gave the nudge and said, it's time, was it fairly quick for you guys to get going?
I think it was reasonably. A lot of things were happening at that time. Yeah, I just got married, and we were going to switch houses once it happened, and so it did happen reasonably quick when it did. And my parents, it was more about, as you said earlier, seeing the firm succeed than it was about the money at that time. They wanted a comfortable life, but it wasn't. It was to have their legacy met, and no, it was quick and reasonably successful, and no conflict involved. Probably helped that my siblings weren't involved in the firm, and I have 3 sisters that weren't interested in the firm, but at the time. But I do understand the frustrations when you don't talk about it, though. My own father experienced that when he found out his parents, my grandparents' farm. He used the land all his life, and it wasn't willed to him, and he had no idea. So that was a shock to him, and so I think the communications is key all the way along, and the planning. So, yeah.
Excellent. Unfortunately, we hear a lot about that. Before we go to final words of wisdom, I just want to share a little bit as the in-betweener on all the rows, and all the different roles on a farm, because there's a lot of young people. We don't have a lot of farm founders here, I don't think. I didn't know who the audience would be, but I think there's merit as young farmers that are looking to take over. And you guys will be able to touch on this as well. There's a lot of emotion. We want to take over the farm. We want to take over the farm now. maybe we need a bit more time to get that experience. But here's some thoughts and feedback that I've had from different farm founders and different concerns, because I know sometimes what happens personally, whether conversations are avoided on the farm because they don't want to have the conversation, or it's uncomfortable, or they don't have the answers. But with the farm founder, and I think it's important to know these things, because if there's no communication, it's not clear and we don't know what's going on, and it's not fair, right? So the farm founders, some of the concerns, if you're mentioning transition planning and you're being met with resistance, or we'll talk about it later, well, let's name a few of those uncomfortable emotions that I think are so important. The farm founder, maybe they don't know how they're going to survive financially after they retire from the farm, right? So that might be one reason that they're avoiding the conversation. Maybe they want the next generation to have a little bit more time and experience on the farm and take over management and take over some of those financial decisions. Another one is the pure humanness of being the farmer. And I think I'm right in the middle and quite comfortable talking about that. If you look at most farmers and everything we have to deal with, the good years, the bad years, and the grit and resilience it takes to keep on farming, you gotta love what you're doing. You put your blood, sweat, and tears into this, and that's your identity, right? As farmers, they say, well, it's just a business. It's not just a business. We're farmers. So if you look at it, and I'm sharing some of this stuff with you guys because it's what I've seen in my own life. Friends have been met with resistance for transition planning, and some of the things that advisors say, if the conversation's being ignored, well, there's probably real concerns on the founder's part, right? That financial. Also, farm dad, what's he gonna do when he retires, right? I think that's the biggest part. My grandpa didn't transition plan because what else was he ever gonna do, right? I think as the second generation, having those thoughts, being sensitive to the fact that the farm founders, they are the farm and they might not know what's gonna happen after, that might be some of the reasons you're being met with resistance. And I wanna bring that up because it's quite uncomfortable. So just know I see a lot of young faces in the audience, and it took me a long time to figure this stuff out. And most kids that want to take over, kids, end up chasing their tail and just staying working. And in those situations, often, oh, don't worry about it. Oh, don't worry about it. This farm's all going to be yours. And you hear, unfortunately, I'm an individual that likes control of my life. I really do, and I have to name that. It's not quite fair to the second generation that we don't have answers. And that's a lot of what I'm hearing. And I'm trying to bring that openness and that vulnerability to this conversation, because they might not be getting anywhere with farm founders. They chase their tail around and around, and it doesn't take long for you to work 5, 10, 15 years, 20 years on a farm, and then all of a sudden you realize you've put all your blood, sweat, and tears into the family farm, and then it's being willed to all children, no compensation. So with season 7 of our show, the Impact Farming Show, like I said, I started this deep down because of the transition planning conversation. Did a lot of episodes over the years about that. And then I've come back really strong because I don't see a lot of people hosting these conversations and kind of pulling the Band-Aid off and talking about some of those hard subjects on all aspects, right? We have farm dad, farm mom, we have farm son or daughter, and then we have the in-law. We even have daughter-in-laws that are going, well, wait a minute, what are we doing? What if something happened to my husband and I live in this house and I don't own it. Like, where's my security, right? So I think as we're seeing here and we're hearing, and with so much information out there, it's important to plan and be prepared and communicate, right?
Speak to that?
Yeah.
One thing that we always praise Henry for was his openness in the process. And if there's any farm founders, as you call them, listening today, I encourage that. As an example, for the 2 years before we transitioned, Lauchie did all the books on the farm, did all the bookkeeping. And so how amazing is that? Like, by the time we took over, we knew every aspect of the financial situation of that operation. And that alone enabled us to hit the ground running, because we knew where the weak spots were, but we also knew where we could make improvements. And so, you know, as a younger generation, I'm not going to say coached people, but I've talked to some younger generation, including family. And so one thing I tell them is, don't be afraid to ask for more responsibility if you're not given that responsibility. So ask if you can see the books, ask if you can be part of the bookkeeping process. Come to them with a proposal. You know, how it's not like I say, use Excel, put some numbers in an Excel sheet, come to them with some scenario analysis done to say, okay, if I was to take over in 2 years or in 5 years, you know, this is what the debt, the level of debt would be, or this is what, you know, the return on investment would be. And there's people that can help you do that. And by you taking that initiative, that could take some of that fear away, because sometimes the owners just don't even know where to start. So, you know, if you bring that to the table, it starts a conversation and it makes it seem less scary.
I love it. I love it. And I keep on saying this isn't about the tax plan. Dad, Mom, they're not stalling because of the tax plan. They're stalling because of reasons. They might not know how to handle that, right? And I've seen it in my generation. We're the ones with all the tools in front of us, and the farm founders might not even know where to start. So what happens if you're uncomfortable in life, right? You don't know how to start the conversation, you're going to ignore it, like I mentioned. So if you are Gen 2 looking to take over the farming operation, I love that. Come to your parents. Again, one of the biggest things that our farm advisors suggest is, one, obviously no entitlement, right? We don't come to the parents. It's our parents' farm. They get to do what they want with it. And the advisors say, don't come with that gimme, 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 right? I want to help you, Mom and Dad. Here's some things I've learned about transition planning. Here's somebody that can help us with the conversation. Because personally, I've just seen a lot of farm founders that didn't know where to start, stall and stall and stall, right? And as Gen 2, I know how important it is for us to take over the farm and make sure that we're invested and that it all goes successfully, right? If we don't plan, the farm won't continue on. So communicate, and plan, and go ahead, Bloyce.
And sorry to interrupt, but sometimes it's the little things that my father was what stalled in our negotiations at the time, and it took a while for me to figure out what it was. Is my father didn't know what he was going to do for a vehicle because he drove the farm truck, and I didn't know that was what was holding things up until my mother told me. And I said, so we made a deal that I would buy him a new truck, and then it just went smooth after that. So it was just because he always drove the farm truck. He didn't know, he didn't have that security. So it's sometimes just little things that need to be talked about.
I love that, and I love that you're echoing some of these weird topics that I'm bringing up. I'm the oddball media person, just saying let's talk about all these odd things because it drives me bananas. I see it clear in all these farm families. We're stalled because of a vehicle. We're stalled because farm founder, dad, mom, they don't know what they're going to do. When a simple conversation about, hey, you know what? when you retire, we hope that you come back and you're still working on the farm. There you go. Michael, our first guest of the morning, spoke about identity. And it's so important. It's one of the biggest things in self-help. We'll never act on something in a consistent manner that doesn't align with our identity. Now, okay, look at farmers. What's our identity? We're a farmer. We farm. And those farm founders, unless they're done, they want to farm. And if they're going to retire, what's their identity, right? So it's the smallest things. And if, again, I sound like a broken record, but I just want the conversations that matter to be happening. So if you're stalled out on your transition plan, farm founder doesn't want to have that conversation, dig a little bit deeper. What's that concern, right? Maybe you can get to it. Maybe it's a farm vehicle. Maybe it's they just don't know what they're going to do, so they don't want to leave. When if we prepare, we can think of some of those objections, right? We want to take over the farm. We want to buy the farm. Whatever the case is. Well, how can we help the founding generation to get what they want? And so they're successful too. So different conversation. If this was a room of farm founders, I'd be saying some different stuff. But I think that's communication is what I think to be the magic sauce when it comes to transition planning. And there's a lot of people finally just naming it. Okay, guys. Final words, regrets, do's, don'ts. Audience of young generation 2.
No regrets. But if you don't want stress in your life, don't get into politics. And that's my only suggestion.
Yeah, we have no regrets either. The only thing I'll say is get the farm founders to something like this, because I think it's them that needs it. You guys are all eager to get into farming, but the farm founders need to hear exit plans and different ideas of what they can be doing, you know, with the retirement. So I think I'd say get the farm founders in a room like this and educate them on farm succession.
I guess we have no regrets. You didn't ask me before you answered that question. I think looking back on the time, so stressful for us. Even though we knew it was something we wanted to do, it was still like this massive thing. And I think just taking time to breathe and to talk to other people. Don't do it alone. You know, if you have friends who are in the same boat. I know there was a session this morning on mental health, I think. That's really important because this is a massive thing. It's a lot of risk. It's a lot of stress. And so just make sure that you have your people around you, and leave it in the barn, right? Like when it's Christmas dinner, just let it go and have Christmas dinner, because those things are really important. And you know, this really is at the end of the day your identity and your home, but it is a business, and there's lots of options. So, you know, take a breather and remember that the family is more important.
I love it. This has been a great panel, guys. I'm going to end this with a quote that I love, and I think it is so relevant for transition planning, and I'm sure many of you have heard it. A farm is more than land and crops. It is a family's heritage and future. I love that one. I mean, the family farm, that's your guys' future, right? So prepare, be sensitive to the founding generation. It's exciting. We have exciting times ahead. Transition planning is stressful, but exciting. So do me one favor, guys. We'll open it up for questions, but truly, I have put together this list here. Go ahead and download it. There are books. There's also people, farm coaches, different people that are leaders in transition planning that you can follow online, YouTube channels, all kinds of resources. This book here, I name it in this document. It's one of the best I've found. It's pretty comprehensive on transition planning because it's all a little gray. I mean, most of us only ever transition plan once. And what's all the steps? Before, like you said, Jolene, before going out, sorry to the accountants and lawyers, but before you go out and get professionals involved, read a book like this. It's $20. They're all available on Amazon, all the ones I list here. Go through, and I know even before I read these, and I've been doing transition planning for a long time on my show, I just started reading a lot of these books that are newly available, and they really make it clear so that as the younger generation, you can bring the conversation up and not just say, I want to take over the farm. Because where does conversation go from there, right? So as the future farmers, the future of farming in PEI, prepare yourself, and yeah, it's an exciting future. Thank you, guys. We will, go ahead. We'll open for questions. Just a kind reminder, because when I do this, we are not the technical experts, and everybody likes to ask okay, this is my farm situation, how do we transition plan? I'd love to give you guys all the answers, I can't. So if you guys have questions of Bloyce and Lauchie and Jolene, myself, please go right ahead. We'd love to chat with you guys.
It's dinner after this. They just want dinner.
Good evening. My question's, I guess, for Bloyce, just because kind of fits the narrative. You were saying now that you're looking into certain ways of how to make the farm viable, to take over, and things like that. When would you suggest that the next generation should start to have somewhat of a say, maybe not like the majority of a say, but at least take their word into consideration?
That's a great question, and I don't know if I have the answer for that one, but my kids are 19 and 16 right now. And all I know is my kids aren't going to farm the same way I farmed. Just like I'm not farming the same way my father did, and he's not farming the same way his father did. So I have to set up my farm to be... Lauchie and Jolene are milking their cows right now, sitting here, and that's how I want my children. That's what they're going to milk they're not going to milk cows. The robot's going to milk cows. So they have to see that as a viable future, and I think they have to see it, and I think they have to be involved in what that looks like going forward. I don't think they're there yet, but I think if in the next 5 years, I'm going to encourage them to see other farms, see what they like, encourage them to work on other farms, and if they don't like it at all, that's great. But I think the conversation has to start now on what East Side Farms looks like, whether it's a dairy farm or whether it's a cash crop farm, I don't know. Or do we move on? So that's, and it's tough for a 16-year-old who just loves farming to make those decisions yet. So, but I love that she loves farming. So we'll see. We'll see. So I think over the next 5 years, that's something that I have to look at and kind of mentor them into what they want, and but still keeping it in that they have to make their own decision. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but that's where we're at.
To say, like, how much involvement should they have before what they feel should happen has weight for you, I guess. And it's not limited only to Bloyce,
No, and I think they have to see, I'd love them to work on another farm to see how things work and work for someone other than mom and dad, and just to see how things operate.
Yeah, I'll I'll just give you a bit of my experience, I guess. So 6.5 years was our succession era, I guess, or timeline. So the day I went back, I started making all the breeding decisions on the farm. So I bred every cow to what I wanted it bred to. That was part of our deal. That was one thing that I brought that I wanted to do, and Henry respected that because he knew I liked the cow part of it, and I think that's why he wasn't really a cow guy. He was an equipment field guy, and that's why we got along so well, because I looked after the barn and he looked after the fields, and so we both did the things we enjoyed, and that's why we worked out. The other thing Jolene mentioned was bookkeeping 2 years before. Anything you can do to give you a better grasp of what you're getting into, I think helps. And earlier the better. You can't start too early, I don't think. Maybe not making all the decisions, but helping make the decisions. At least have the conversations on the way you were gonna on what you're planning, I guess.
Thank you.
And just to add to that, on the bookkeeping, my wife took my son and sat down at the kitchen table and said, "You're going to start helping us with this." And he couldn't believe the amount of bills that a farm gets. So just by opening all the envelopes, he was amazed. And the stack of revenue against the stack of expenses was quite different, he thought. So it's a good example of what to do. Yeah.
I was just going to say it'll be easier this week because the strike is on Canada Post, so there's no bills coming in.
We don't have to pay them this week.
Pay them if they don't come.
And I think the important thing with that is really just asking. If you want more responsibility, ask. Mm-hmm. We always forget, right? And there's those family dynamics that we never quite get rid of because they're family. If you want more responsibility, ask. The worst thing they can say is no, not right now, right? But at least you asked and you expressed willingness. Any other questions?
This is a question more for Bloyce. You had mentioned that the succession went a little smoother because you had siblings that didn't want to farm. However, because it's still family, and I'm just curious, did you have to factor in your siblings' inheritance into the transition process?
Yes, I did. And I'm fortunate that my parents were upfront about that as well, and I knew what they weren't. They were very generous to me, and I can't complain about anything. So, but that was very transparent right from the get-go that this was. They held back some land, they held back some property that was going to be my sister's, yeah. But over the last few years, or few years later, I did buy some of that inheritance beforehand, so it's all worked out. Yeah, but no, that was a part of it.
I guess I have a follow-up then too. Then did that, like you had said, the inheritance was all laid out bare, which is great. But did that affect your plans for the farm? Because now, let's say, I'll just say, if 15% of the land was now held back, that's land you're not able to make money off of, basically, and how that really changed your plans, or did it make you question anything?
It worked out okay because I was able to use the land that they held back. So, and then once I got my feet under me, I was able to buy the land. So now that, so it did work out, and my sisters are still going to get their inheritance, And it seems to be fair. I don't know. You'd have to ask them if it's fair, but to me, it was fair. But very transparent right from the get-go. My mother made sure I knew what, probably because of what my father went through with his his sisters, that he didn't know that he wasn't getting the land that he used every day of his life. So.
I'll comment really quick on fair and equal. I think that's the big elephant in the room, and I don't have the answers. I'll say that right up front. And I wish we could talk about it, but that's where those advisors come in, because they have thoughts, ideas, plans. The earlier the planning starts, the better it is. A lot of these books, just so you guys know, I'm a geek. I like reading. I'm going to keep on saying books. But all the books that I've suggested talk about fair and equal, and I think that is the big elephant in the room. And I'll talk about another uncomfortable situation. I'll just get them all out today, okay? Back in the day, it would be the eldest son that took over, and that's it, right? And now, that's not so much happening anymore, and I think that is one of the big reasons that our parents freeze up, and I didn't even think to name that before. The farm founder has his concerns about his role, the finances, all of that stuff. But at the end of the day, the fair and equal is really holding up a lot of farm families. And that's where you can talk to advisors and coaches and get some feedback, start some learning on that. But let's be truthful. Fair and equal is the biggest subject. And with the price of land, what I hear from a lot of the advisors, the children that aren't going to farm aren't too excited about not getting their inheritance anymore. So it's become a big issue. And I can't remember if it was Patrick or Derek said, if you are buying land at full price, it's not going to pencil out. So it becomes a bit of a tricky math equation. And let's be fair, I think that's what holds up a lot of the founders. Not only for the financial aspect of it, but just the fair and equal. They don't want to favor one child over the other. They don't have the answers, because if you're using all the land and all the cows on your farming operation to pay the bills, chances are you can't take a quarter, whatever it is, out of production without affecting the farm finances. So that is the tricky one, the elephant in the room. I think one of the reasons that caused a lot of farm founders to freeze up. But I think that's where it's important, where we learn, talk to advisors, and see if there's different solutions. I know there's corporations and shares and all kinds of stuff. If your parents happen to have assets that are not tied up in the farm, which I think a lot of farm families just reinvest in the farm and buy more land, so that's difficult. But yeah, that is one of the big ones, the fair and equal.
I'm going to jump in here too, because we've thought a little bit about that, like even early on, and it's why I still work full-time off the farm, even though that was super not fun for most of the time that we were doing it. It was to give us the cash flow to make those other investments, to put some money away, so that our retirement didn't depend solely on the sale of the farm, and putting away, you know, what we could for the kids' education, and so to give to them in other ways, so that it wasn't all going to whoever took over the farm. And I'd highly suggest you think about that the day you start putting that money away, and if you can't afford it, find a way to afford it, because it'll just tie you up afterwards when you're trying to transition and you have nothing set aside. It really makes transition difficult.
Just a quick question here. How would you just deal with the situation if there was multiple siblings and a handful of them, like let's say two of them decided they showed interest in the farm, and two others decided they didn't. But then years down the line, when the transition process finally started to come into place, and the two others decided, hey, I actually want to farm now, how would you handle that situation?
Go ahead, Bloyce. You have children, you're thinking about this, so you're the expert.
I don't know. I was fortunate that my sisters, even though one of them is married to a farmer, none of them were really interested in farming. So it's a tough one, and I see it a lot in generational families where there's multiple children on the farm, and sometimes it works out great. And I'm not a really expert on that to give advice. So I don't know.
There's no easy answer for that. That's just a sucky situation, honestly. And there's no way to really prepare for it. But I'll tell you what goes through my mind as we farm. I'm always watching the kids and watching what their interests are and thinking about ways that we could utilize the resources of the farm to grow revenue to bring those kids back if they want. And that's something that I heard an advisor say one time. If you plan on going back to the farm, you got to plan on bringing that revenue back to pay for yourself. You can't just say, I want to come back, and now that 100 kgs of quota has to be split up 3 ways instead of 2. That's just not fair. So you've got to bring value back with you. So I'm always thinking, like, is there an agritourism aspect to the farm that maybe my daughter would like to have? Or, we have a little beef herd that my son's been doing since he was 5. I don't know. He's been loving beef cows for some strange reason since he was a little guy. And so we just encourage that. And I think that's the kind of thinking, like, we can't just take the pie and keep slicing the pieces thinner. We've got to grow the pie. And I think in Atlantic Canada, that's our biggest opportunity and our biggest challenge, is that we can't just buy another quarter section. It's not there like some of our colleagues out west can do. We've got to figure out ways to get more value out of these pieces of property that we have. And so that's what gets me jacked up. That's what I like to talk about. Like, what can we be growing that creates more revenue, or what can we be doing? We've got a farm in Truro. I don't know if you guys have heard of River Breeze. They used to be a beef farmer, and now they're an agritainment system. Like, they have fast passes to their Halloween corn maze, like Disneyland. It's insane. And the guy's just sitting there rolling in it because he just figured out a way to, like, create revenue on property that used to be beef cows and strawberries. And that's the kind of thinking that, that I think we have to instill in the next generation. So I'm not trying to slight you if this is your personal situation, the poor guy that asked the question, but I'm just saying, like, it can happen, but you got to think creatively, and you got to bring some of those ideas with you.
As the next generation, starting early and planning is the key. Right now, some of the advisors that I interview are big on what you said, and they call it adjacent side hustles. Mm-hmm. So a side hustle. If you are wanting to come back to the farm, and knowing the numbers is important, can that farm support you to come back? Can that farm support a second kid? There's a great way to bring you back if you're bringing income. If you have tractors, whatever, soil sampling. There was a gentleman that mentioned a few things this morning. If you want to come back farming, realistically, if I was taking somebody back to the farm, it's like, okay, here's our financials. Can we afford to have that child come back, right? So if they come back and they say, well, we're going to work and I'm going to build my herd up with your herd, or I'm going to have this side hustle, which is very common nowadays, that's a great way to come back to the farm. But you're right, it's hard when we want to split the pie several ways, and one person should only be eating that pie.
I'd like to challenge our professionals in this question, like what I often think it doesn't have to be farming too, and sometimes we've blatantly said that the next hustle is not going to be farming to diversify the portfolio a little bit and to decrease the risk, so maybe it's an apartment building. And how do the accountants and bankers feel about you leveraging some of that farm asset and doing something different in a different way that can provide even passive income? So you have to go fix a bathroom every now and then, and somebody from the farm has to do that, but it's creating more opportunity for the farm to stay a farm. And so again, I just challenge you to think about things that may not be what you even considered, but are going to bring in revenue to help the business stay in operation.
Any other questions? No? I think they all want to go eat. Well, guys, I hope this has been valuable. I am passionate about this topic. I'm passionate about the future of farming. Be curious, be optimistic, be humble, communicate with your parents, start the conversation, learn. These are all the things that advisors are saying that they learn when they work with farm families. So future's in your hands, right? It's your future, so take the bull by the horns. I'm the cattle farmer. Yeah, there we go. Well, thank you guys for being such a fantastic audience. And since we are live recording, and this is going to air on the Impact Farming Show shortly, I'll close the episode and thank everybody in the audience for joining us, and thank everybody that's going to be watching on YouTube and listening on podcasts. Thank you guys so much, and best of luck to everybody.
You've been listening to Impact Farming. For more great episodes and articles designed to help you manage and grow your farming operation, head on over to farmmarketer.com. Don't forget to sign up while you're there. We will see you on the next episode.